Welcome back to Beyond. Be sure to hit like and subscribe for the channels that helps the algorithm find the show. And we're continuing our series, Roadmaps to Resilience with Burke Brown. Burke, welcome.
Hey, good to be back here, Ben. Really glad to get this started.
Yeah, really fired up about this series. I think it's really important in this time for sure. But when we think about resilience, for me, it starts with a fundamental question. What are you building your life on? And that question really drives the reality of three choices we have to anything we encounter in life. When we think about the three choices we have that we're building our foundation on is, as we hit life, we can either waste the opportunity, we can either spend the opportunity, or we can invest the opportunity. And so intuitively, we all know the importance of a foundation. And we know from architecture, the foundation of a building determines the strength and size of the building. We could imagine that Freedom One Tower in New York, if it was built on the foundation that your house rests on, there's no way it could withstand the winds, the gale force winds, the pressures on the building, just the sheer scope and size of the building. It would crumble in a heartbeat. So it seems to me that instead of, we think about the foundations we build our lives on, if they're puny and they're small, we can expect the results in our lives not to probably turn out so well. But when we think about the importance of a foundation, it's important to really think about what we want for our lives, the size and scope and the dreams of our lives, and to make sure that the foundation is proportionate with those dreams. So as we think about some practical strategies as we're sort of going through this COVID time and how do we deal with the stressors and the anxiety, et cetera, I want to discuss some sort of 6 recipes for success, if you will, to build that foundation in our lives that will support the dreams, ambitions, and goals. So the first one I sort of identified is really embrace the emptiness and uncertainty of your life. If there's not a more clear picture of time in this day and age of people feeling somewhat uncertain and empty, right. I can't imagine a more poignant time with the pandemic we're going through. And when we think about emptiness and uncertainty, I sort of liken the example to a coffee mug and its function, right? The mug is made of something hard and dry material, but right. What makes the mug useful? And the answer is it's emptiness. Without emptiness, the mug can't hold any liquids. And I would argue that the emptiness and uncertainty we're going through right now and that we're feeling is really a setup for a bigger future, a bigger success. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, man. I think when we reach these places, the way that I kind of always say it is when you reach a place where you have been kind of almost where your foundation is shaken, right? When your foundation is shaken, you have to reassess the way that you approach everything. You have to reassess the way that you see the world. You have to change the story. The narrative has been changed. And when the narrative is changed, yes, you've kind of falter or you stumble or you fall or you lose something. May it be a job or income or whatever. That emptiness that you're talking about really kind of comes alive because what you know you must do is you must pivot. If you don't know how to pivot, then you cannot evolve. And really all life is a series of waves, a series of cycles that over time really kind of allow you to get good at shifting with the tides. The problem is most people feel that when things are settled, stable, safe, then all they have to do is just hit cruise control. But there is no evolution without you being able to pivot. And the only time that you can pivot is when obstacles come up, when situations come that take you or rock you off your chair a little bit, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think when we think about emptiness in this way and that we see emptiness or a setback, but we think about what emptiness brings, we couldn't shoot a goal without emptiness, right?
Right.
We couldn't throw a punch without emptiness. The solar system is really set up with emptiness in mind, that things can sort of function within it. And so I think the idea of bracing the emptiness and uncertainty of life is really a setup for something great and not necessarily right. Negative. And it's just about how we look at that.
Absolutely, man. I think that you have to, before a tree blossoms and grows and stands tall, it has to build those roots, right? And in a lot of ways, sometimes you have to go down before you can really go up. And in terms of going down, that's digging into the mud. That's digging into the difficulty. You know, they say that palm trees gain strength by the pressure of the wind. Like if it goes through a storm, its roots become stronger. And so that's kind of ultimately what can be kind of seen of for the time that we're in right now. This is a chance for me to prove that circumstances don't dictate how my life works. My perspective is what dictates how my life works. And once I say that my perspective dictates how my life works, then I am no longer a slave to those external circumstances. And so when we have these moments where what we held on to is taken from us, then we get to stretch our hands open again and say, okay, what do I want to hold on to? Not grasp, but just hold on to. When I'm climbing a mountain, right, I don't get stuck or fixated on climbing this one piece of this rock. As soon as I latch onto that next thing, I open up and then clasp onto the other. I'm never married to the rock. It's only something that is used to get me to get to the top of the mountain, right? It's a nice way to think of it.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And I like that analogy. And so when I think about another foundational principle that we're trying to build our lives with some practical recipes, I think about embracing passivity versus activity. And this is sort of what you talked about before, where you said, when we think about meditation and we think about slowing down, that's sort of a passive activity. And, it really makes sense in life because you think about society in America, it's all about being active, right? Proactive, go for it. And it's all about getting results, getting things done, going from point A to point B. Because of this, we really lack a respect for the passive elements in life. And I'd say that they're really all around us. And it's strange because you think about passivity is the essential for every form of accomplishment. What do I mean by that? And I know you're a strength coach. You used to teach people and still do how to move their body, how to work out, how to get strong. But we know from a strength training example that muscles aren't built in the gym. They're built in the bed. You need a chance to have a passivity around the muscles to deconstruct and reconstruct in stronger form. So talk to us a little bit about the importance of being passive in nature as we're going through these stressful times.
Absolutely, man. It's so interesting. I say the same thing when I'm with my clients. Yes, we're going to strengthen the muscles, but the thing that we're doing to strengthen the muscles is breaking them down. You have to have these micro tears that are happening when you exercise, not major tears. These micro tears, what they do is, let's say that you have your muscle fibers. When you exercise, you tear those muscle fibers down and the body says, oh, alert. All of a sudden, I need to make sure that I recruit more muscle fibers so the next time that this comes on, I'm strong enough to handle that weight without as much difficulty. Same thing happens in our lives. This really comes back to that cycle thing that I'm saying. Most people want to live their lives where it's just this constant trajectory up. That's not realistic. That's not life. It is the flow, the ebb and flow that makes life. It's the yin and yang that makes life worthwhile, that makes us grow. I tear my muscle fibers down and I sleep, and in my rest, they rebuild stronger, right? And so what it can do is it can teach us a couple things. I say that I learn a lot from nature. Nature I trust more than I trust the ideas of man because nature has been doing it for millennia, right? And so the way that I take that is, okay, as I build the world that I want, I also know that it's extremely important that I take time to rest, that I take time to turn off, that Netflix is actually okay every once in a while, that having a cheat meal is absolutely okay and almost important to being able to get the body that you want. What you're doing is you're allowing yourself to still be versatile. You're allowing yourself to have time to sit back, to relax and enjoy the simple things. When you do that, that gives you a new level of willpower to be able to handle the next days. Too many times people think that bulldozing is what makes you grow. The truth is that's not what it is. If you think of a boulder, a massive rock, it's impenetrable, except with water over a millennia. Water is patient and it flows and it's happy to skirt around the rock. But as time goes by, with enough of it rushing, it'll change the shape of the rock and slowly create a chasm right through it, i.e. the Grand Canyon. So what we start to realize is that it's not about being this hardcore, strong, aggressive. It's about being able to balance between that and also being the passive, the one who sits in the cut, right? During a bull market, everybody's buying, but the investor is waiting for that bear market because they know that now is not the time to pull the trigger. It's funny. This is something that Bruce Lee said. I'm an avid fan of Bruce Lee, but he says when he's fighting, he goes, "When my opponent expands, I retract. When he retracts, I expand. And when the opportunity presents itself, I do not hit. It hits all by itself." And so what that in essence means is that when you become passive, you become aware. You allow yourself to reset and you're not so caught up. And when the opportunity presents itself, then you know when to go aggressive. You know exactly what to do because you're not busy just trying to spin your wheels, right? It's that ability to dance between that yin and yang, between moving and pausing, building and resting. That's really where the strength is it lies.
Yeah, I really like that concept of flow. When we think about passivity and activity, it's what we talked about last week about surfers finding a wave or dolphins finding a wave. They're not building the wave; they're looking for the wave to flow with. And I think that's a lot of truth to that in life. As we think about relationships, if you force fit a relationship, it rarely works out. If you force fit and go after something that's maybe way above your potential, that's not going to work out so well. So the idea of just flow and going with the flow, I think it relaxes. I think it takes the stress away, because with stress, there's expectations. There's things in our mind that we think we need to accomplish. And if we don't accomplish it, we're less than, we're not successful. We've not accomplished, we've disappointed our parents, or whatever may be the construct in our mind that causes that anxiety and stress. So I think the idea of flow is critical. And speaking of flow, I think the third foundational or fundamental foundational principle to building a good solid foundation is embracing the concept of humility and flexibility. It sort of talks about what you said earlier about water flow. When you think about the ocean, it's the lowest element on the planet Earth. Now, I'm not talking below sea level. I'm talking when you reference everything, it's at sea level, or in some cases in Israel, it's below sea level. But we always look at and reference sea level as the lowest point on physical landmass on Earth. And you think about that, it's the lowest element of all things on your Earth. I would argue it's the most powerful. It certainly contains water, which is the softest of all things. Yet it's the most powerful form on the planet that can literally etch planets by just sitting there. Kind of like what you were saying, the Grand Canyon.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to flow and show powerful activity. It just simply has to be. It's sort of the humble part of it. It's the lowest part, and it's very flexible. Yet it can change the course of planets, land masses, and re-etch, if you will, the Earth.
Right. Yeah. It's according to the theory of flow. I think we mentioned it briefly when we last spoke. But essence, flow is when you're in a space where you are so engaged and so raptured in the moment that all you are focusing on is the present moment. You're not worried about the past. You're not thinking about the future and the upcoming deadlines that you have. You're in such an engaged space. You're playing an instrument, you're painting. It doesn't matter what it is that you're doing, but you feel connected. And when you're in that space, it's not about work anymore. When you're in that space, it's not about following these techniques to become successful. When you're in that space, you're authentic. And to be honest, flow is authenticity. Flow is no effort. Flow is present. Right? When you're in that flow, that's when you can be most creative. And when you're most creative is when most people are drawn to you. Just even if you're trying to start a business, when I'm working with my clients, I say authenticity is what we start off with you. They're like, hey, I need a brand identity. I'm like, no, I call it identity branding. What is your identity already? That's your natural state. Once you know that, we build from there to build your brand. It's starting from who you are, what you naturally flow towards and care about. Therefore, when you work, all that you have to do is get into authenticity. If I had a job that was inauthentic to me, that means that every day that I go to work, I must lie to myself, to my coworkers, to everybody that I'm around. But if I create a business of my own or find a business where my authenticity is promulgated, is pushed up, is supported, then that means that I must go and tell the truth every day of my life. And when I'm doing that, I'm not only just gaining myself internal motivation where I feel satisfaction in what I do, but I'm also hitting that space of flow. And that is what the goal is how can I create as many structures around me to create flow and then turn that flow into a service that flows to other, which brings that flow of energy back to me. And that's money energy that it brings back to me so that I can further engage in creating more flow. That's where the dance is. That's where success is. That's where money actually has its right purpose, not for accumulation, but to increase flow for myself and the people that I serve.
Right.
Right.
That's really important. I think with more humility and flexibility, you actually attract people, you attract opportunities because you're authentic, you're real, and you're not forcing the issue. I think anytime it's forced, that's why salespeople get their reputations, and probably they're well-deserved. They're trying to force a transaction. They're trying to force a relationship as opposed to letting the flow come based on the goods and services they offer. Because look, if it's meeting an unmet clinical need or real need or practical need, people will buy it. There will be a market. Right. And the idea of trying to force something is really missing the point. And I would argue again, if you have a humble and flexible approach like the ocean, you could be all powerful, yet just be and exist and transform land masses or transform relationships or transform your business in the process. So as I think about another principle of a solid foundation that would be able to sustain and support Freedom One Tower in New York, the equivalent thereof, I also think about the importance of surrounding ourselves with eagles, right? People of like mind, people that are going places, right? We can have goals and dreams. We surround ourselves with wet rags, right? Dousing out the flames and fires that burn within us, right? We'll never soar. So let's talk about, or if you wouldn't mind, talk about the importance about who we surround ourselves with and how that could really empower our progression.
Yeah. In my research and the work that I do, I kind of have these 3 pillars and a 4th one that I've implemented. Albert Bandura, he's a psychologist, Canadian-American psychologist at Stanford. And so one of his theories in behavior is what causes or elicits behavior, both good or bad, irrelevant. There are three pillars. The first pillar, personal, it's your cognition, it's your attitude, it's the way that you see the world, right? It's your personal perspective of the universe and how things are. Whether you think things are good or bad, they kind of turn out that way, your perspective. Next is your behavior. Your behavior elicits behavior. If you think about it, if I act a certain way long enough, it becomes a habit, right? And then the third is your environment. That's your surroundings. And your environment can be a couple of things. It can be the physical environment. Case in point, I can only get out of a room by walking through the door. Where the contractor put the door is where I must go. So the environment forces my flow. The same is one that we can control, the people around us, the people that we have. And then there's a scripture, it says, I think it's from the Bible, it says, walk with the wise and grow wise. And indicative of that, it can also mean walk with the foolish and grow foolish, right? Walk with the people who eat unhealthily, then walk with the drinkers and so who you surround yourself is who you ultimately become, right? I don't know if it's Jim Rohn, but I think there's a statement that said, whoever the 5 people you spend the most time with are the people that you're going to most likely become. And there's a book called Cash Flow Quadrant. And they had, the 4 quadrants. One quadrant was an employee, other was self-employed, other was a business owner, and the other was an investor. And he said, I want you to write the initials of the 10 people you spend the most time with. And wherever you put them is what you're most likely going to be. And when I was an employee, they were all employees. Then I moved it to finding self-employed people. Then I moved it to business owners, right? And then moving it slowly towards investors. This is the process. And so just like you said, finding mentors, people that are lifting you up is extremely important, and surrounding yourself with them, and finding people that are accountability partners that are pushing you forward. But that doesn't mean neglect the people who are also trying to grow that are kind of at a level lower. You help them up. But as soon as they start to pull you down more than you pull them up, you understand that I was made for the Eagles, and you let go.
You got to cut the ripcord, man. Got to get out of that.
Cut it. Umbilical cord, man. That's where it is, because they're taking your nutrients.
That's right.
Right.
That's really interesting, because I remember there's a point when I was young, graduated from college, went to a place called NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training, where we actually flew with the NATO countries in Europe. And one of the things that was impressive is I remember we had, within the flight, we had some German students that were 19. Okay. And the typical American was about 22, 23 going into pilot training. And one of the things that really impressed me was the level of competition and quality of talent. Wow. I mean, it was eye-opening, where you came from ROTC at your university, right? To get into Euronato, you're in the top, 3% of the graduates. So you think you're at a high level, and then you go there and you see what levels are. Right. Talk about leveling up and the standards they set, whether it's a neurosurgeon, a cardiac surgeon, a pilot. Those kind of personalities they naturally gravitate to the idea of leveling up. And the idea of, who you surround yourself with is critical. I think a lot of people in the society want to use the old quaint phrase that says, don't judge, right? In other words, accept me as I am and all that goes with it. And then you got the sort of the religious edicts that says, love thy neighbor as yourself, and accept, and all those concepts, which is important at some level. But I think it can't be confused with the life force you're trying to develop, what you're trying to do with your life, and to recognize how important it is to get the right constituents of people in your life. Because either way, like you said before, you'll either soar at the Eagles, or you'll be at a bottom basement low your whole life wondering why you're there. Right. So I think, while you can try to forgive people, don't let their burdens become your burdens. Don't borrow trouble, because it'll absolutely weigh you down and you'll never fly. That's just been my experience. That doesn't mean you can't help people. You can't encourage people. You can't be an example for people. But it's almost like in life, you got to be on the edge all the time, because when you're at that perceived pinnacle, you've sort of made it. That's when you're most susceptible to getting knocked off, right? Pride comes before destruction. And so it's really about being humble and staying in the moment, staying in the present, like we've talked about. And by the way, it's not that the past is a bad thing, because it can help guide what the future should look like, because there's some lessons learned. And it's not that the future is a bad thing, because there's hope and there's momentum and there's that encouragement of what it could be. But boy, the present's everything that really has to be protected to the nth degree.
It's funny, man. With my clients, as we do the work that we do, there's this period where they kind of come and they're like, hey, I'm trying to take it to another level and I'm not able to do it right now. And I need some guidance. I need some support. So we do the work. and we break down some of the false beliefs, and we break down their core beliefs about what they think they're not capable of, right? And then we push beyond that, and then all of a sudden they have this euphoric, and I mean euphoric experience of how amazing they feel because they can absolutely do anything. And what I tell them as soon as that happens is congratulations. But the last thing you want to do right now is rest on your laurels. Because if you think that you've got it, that's when you lose it. Because the thing is that it's not about breakthrough and win and game over. It's about breakthrough and win and now know how to win. Because there's going to be another dip. And there's going to be another dip. And that is the ebb and flow of life. That's one of the most difficult things for my clients to swallow, is that they're constantly going to have up and downs. But what we want to do is we want to increase their speed at bouncing back. That's it. That's how you win. The win is based on how quickly you can bounce back, if you bounce back at all. And so getting people to understand not to rest on their laurels. When things are getting good, when things are now you're starting to believe that you're capable, this is when you put your feet in the sand and you're saying, I'm absolutely going to continue this work to develop myself. Otherwise, you backslide.
No, that's a great point. And what you're saying, the yin and the yang, and the idea of flow and ebb and flow. And I think if you can see life in that construct, it should it should keep you always humble. Why? Because you recognize that you could be at the top of the heap, right? You're 30 years old, you bought that dream house, you got married, the white picket fence, you're starting your family, and you could lose it all within years through a divorce, through health, through whatever.
Pandemic.
So you recognize in life, and I think most people, if they're 60, 70, they would appreciate that. Yeah, as I look back in my life, there's some highs, some lows, and it's really a flow state. And so it's not getting too high or too low.
Right.
Just recognizing that, like I said earlier, when you think about the purpose of a coffee mug, right, is to be filled with something. So the emptiness itself isn't a bad thing, because it's just a setup for a future great event. But we recognize that a lot of things in life are just an ebb and flow. You win, you lose, right? You think about Michael Jordan, The Last Dance, he won 6 championships, but do you think it was easy for him when he retired? His identity sort of tied up into the greatest basketball player of all time, where he stepped in that court and could dominate anybody that was in front of him, the top best players in the world. And then he had to let it all go because Father Time. And the idea that it's an ebb and a flow. You could be at the pinnacle and then you're no longer there. But that doesn't mean his life and the constituents parts of his life aren't amazing now, married with 2 young twins, etc. So it just sort of ebbs and flows and changes as we grow, right? So I think we have that perspective. Hopefully it would keep us humble, because we know that while we're riding high and we got the tiger by the tail, it won't always be that way.
Yeah. It's just a matter of time. We're a spark in time. We're a spark in time. And so when you kind of allow that truth to seep in, people it can sound existential, it can sound scary, but the truth is just like, I'm going to be the brightest spark I can possibly be. And hopefully I can spark others to light. That's as simple as it is. We have our times, but here's the thing, the arc of time will continue. We will end up dead, right? And if that's going to be no matter what, then we should appreciate every part of the hill, right? And the funny thing is, it's not just, we just imagine that the hill, if you really think of a hill, all a hill is the inverse of a valley. Like that's it. It's an inverse. It's the opposite. And so if I could enjoy this process as much as this process, then all of a sudden I win. And I've had it. I've been in times where I'm going through difficult experiences and I look at it and I can have this meta perspective where I see myself developing right now, even though I don't like this, even though I really don't like the feeling. Another piece of me sees the development. It sees the purpose behind it. And even if I don't see the purpose, I know that I will see the purpose, because in trend with my life, it's always been that way. What it does is it reduces the unnecessary stress of just being in the moment. And then you start to become grateful, because you know that it's preparing you for a new level of your life. If you think that way, if that personal perspective is the way that you live in the world, you win no matter what, even when you're losing, because you're gaining information on how to become better, on how to enjoy life to a deeper degree, where it's not based on just what's happening on the outside.
Yeah, I think every setback is just a PhD in becoming a richer person, a more stout person, a more stronger person, a more capable person, a more wise person. There's so many elements you get out of it. So to get stuck in that story and be sort of a victim approach, it's really a gift. And it's hard to see unless you have some time to separate that event with where you're at 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road. But I would argue some of the biggest setbacks are some of the biggest gifts and blessings you'll ever come across. And again, as I think about this analogy of building a foundation in our lives and how do we build one like the World Trade Freedom Tower 1, I think the next sort of recipe is really identifying and committing to a great purpose, right?
Right.
It's one thing to say, hey, we're surrounding ourselves with the right people. But like you said last time, you got to have a guidance system. The guidance system, in my mind, is having a great purpose in life. And I think people confuse their occupation with the vocation. Why? Because a vocation is really a calling. What you're doing right now, Burke, is you're doing your calling. You're passionate. You don't have to wake up in the morning and say, gee, I'm gonna roll out of bed. Do I really want to talk to Ben? Do I really want to
Right.
You are fired up because you found your vocation, your calling. And I think that's a trick for people is you have to identify and commit to a great purpose, that thing that you were put on this planet to achieve, because you can't do it. And then I think that we have to recognize that great causes create great people, right? You think about or you think about Gandhi or Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa in the slums of Calcutta, right? And she wasn't, looking for fame, but by virtue of her love and her heart and her soul and who she gave to, she really committed herself to something that was beyond herself, right?
Yeah.
And it touched millions of people around the planet. So her and Gandhi are prime examples of great causes leading to great people. So I think that's something to think about when you think about our foundation. What is your purpose? What are you going for? And what are you settling for?
Picasso, he said, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is giving that gift away. And that's kind of that emptiness that you talk about. To find your gift means to admit that it's not clear. You don't know what it is. That's the emptiness. That's the healthy void. What am I here to do? Right? What purpose do I have? And so when you're looking for finding that gift that is yours, once you get it, you're ecstatic. Then you get excited about, how do I give it away? And really the work that I did, I got a client literally that texted me yesterday, and we've been working on deconstructing his false beliefs, deconstructing his narrative that being rich is what will make people love him, right? He erased all that, and it took some work, and then finally got to this space where he's like, I want to create something that's meaningful, right? And he's found it. And he sent me a text and he goes, I finally found my purpose. Thank you. That was the text that I got yesterday. Like, I'm sitting here and I'm just like, this is incredible. The work that I do is I give people the space to find their purpose, and I'm very good at it. So when they find it, the feeling that they have, like literally I had 3 clients in the past 7 days who have discovered what their vision is, what they want to create in the world. And when that happens, it puts you in a place where you're no longer running. I forgot who said it, but there's a quote that says that fear and pain push until the vision pulls. Fear and pain is what pushes us to move forward. But as soon as you catch that vision, you're on the fishing line. It'll pull you. It'll pull you. That's what Steve Jobs talked about. He goes, you have to love it, because if you don't love it, you won't be able to endure the hardships and the obstacles that come in. When you find what you love, there are no such thing as obstacles. They're just momentary impediments, because you're too clear, too patient, too focused, and too purposeful. And that's what it is about. When you find that purpose, I'm done. I let go. I provided those spaces for you to be able to understand what is true about you and what is false about you. And once you know what you are and know what you're trying to create, that's when it's a whole new game. You're working at a different level. You're using the wind and moving your sail properly so that it doesn't push you back, but actually get you closer to where you want to go.
Well, when you have a purpose, that's why I think you could really establish your flow states. When you think about the concept, and it's somewhat, I don't know what the right word is, but it's a concept that sometimes it's hard to sort of grasp onto, the idea of flow. Well, what does that mean exactly? How do you establish a flow state? I would argue that when you have a purpose that's pulling you towards an object, like a magnet, right?
Right.
You have that polarity, not one that pushes away, but that pulls you. Flow is easily established. I think it starts with a construct of who you are in the society, what's important to you, what are your values. And the other thing is, I think it's really important to get clear on what are your values, right? People believe in nothing will fall for everything. And so to have a clear sense of your value system, what your boundaries are, really, really important. Yeah. And then identifying that overarching purpose, which could be found in a lot of different ways. But whatever it is, it's critical to find it, because that's where I think you can sort of establish your flow state, because it'll pull, it'll draw you, and then you can just go flow with the experience. I mean, I'm with a medical device experience where one would argue it's very challenging. You got to get funding, you got to go through the FDA, you got to develop the technology. It has to work. And there's a lot of challenges in that, but when you're just focused and passionate about the process and potentially the opportunity to impact millions of people and their health around the world, you kind of get into that flow state, and you accept what would otherwise seem just massively challenging, right? And it's the purpose that says, this is the vision, this is what we're going after. It's really to help a lot of people, and you can really establish that flow state. But I think it really starts with, kind of what on earth am I here for? I think a lot of people, that's a fundamental question. What am I here for?
Yeah.
I was born either parents of my choosing, right? Or not. As you get older, they were either there or they weren't.
Right.
And now here I am. And it could be a struggle. If I'm, a lot of people that have the silver spoons in their mouth, or the trust fund kids, most people aren't that. So I think a lot of people grapple with, what is my purpose? What's the point of all this?
Right.
And if you don't get that purpose, that's where you can be susceptible to, self-medicating in any number of forms.
It's so crazy, because when you find what it is that you're here to do, and I don't want to make that sound too grand, because a lot of people, myself included, when I was younger, I'm like, what am I here to do? It becomes so big and so grand that you're like, okay, well, hopefully I find it, maybe I won't. But it's just what makes you feel a little bit better, right? And if you kind of follow that process, as time goes by, you're going to find out what makes you feel a lot bit better, and then a lot better, and then what makes you feel amazing. And you just keep going down that path. And once that vision pulls, your perspective changes. Just like you said, your values become more important than the obstacles themselves. What I say is that there's kind of two ways to kind of, you ever heard of a yeah, but? A yeah, but is a person who says, yeah, but. So whatever precedes the yeah is determining kind of how your mindset is. And whatever is after the but determines your mindset as well. So for example, let's say that I'm trying to get in shape. And they're saying, all you have to do is you just have to eat these healthy foods. You say, yeah, I know I need to eat those healthy foods, but it's very difficult. They're so expensive. What I've defined right now is where my value is. My value is whatever's after the but. If I say, yeah, but it's expensive, my value is saying that, hey, it's not that important. Because if it's before the but, it's not that important. But if I say, yeah, the food is very expensive, but I really care about my body, then my value is my body. And the yeah buts in a lot of ways determine and help you clarify. So as you're thinking about all the goals that you have and what you care about and what you want to build, if you're finding yourself saying yeah, but, and the goal is on before the yeah, and the problem is after the but, then you're not really clear about what you want to do. Because what always should happen is the problem should be before, and the solution and the value should be afterwards. That's when you know you're moving in the right direction. So check your yeah buts. Check what's following but. Because that's going to give you a nice indicator of whether you're following your value or it's just an excuse because you really don't care about it that much.
Yeah, that's really important, because I think it all comes down to, what is it you believe in? What are your values? And what I mean by that is, I think a lot of people dishonor themselves growing up. They do things, they make choices that aren't in line with who they are, their value system. And what results from that? Guilt, shame, uncertainty, lack of sense of self. And then I think about when you're trying to create a value system for life, a high performance value system, and an approach to life, all those other things, guilt, shame, depression, weigh you down. And so it's really clear or important to declutter and recognize those are simple choices in time, and time's moved on. And it's really between your ears of how you're perceiving the thing. And it's really important to get clarity, because that's why when you think about the gym business, the home-based gym business, which is showing a resurgence with COVID-19, everybody's working out at home. Yeah. The reason that they sell so much equipment, and then you go look online, the reason it's being resold is because people aren't committed to that vision. And it could be any number of reasons, but discipline is at the sort of the underpinning, a foundational element to a great life. And if you don't see self-worth and self-value in and of yourself, and you want a quick fix such as alcohol, sex, or drugs, it just starts to stack on itself, how we feel about ourselves and how we see ourselves. And are we good enough? Can we go to that next level? Are we worthy of that next level? And in the meantime, in our past, our mind's sitting there saying, well, you're this person, right? And then you have friends, if you haven't surrounded yourself with egos, that are trying to keep you stuck in that time, right? And so all these things are critical if we want that yeah, but to turn into yes, and here's the results. And yes, here's what I did with it. It's really important to think about the choices we're making now and recognize that choices have a one-to-one relationship with our ability to perform, our ability to excel. And if we don't make those right choices, this isn't a judgment statement, Barkay. This is just simply a fact. If we don't make those right choices, it's going to weigh us down depending on the choice consequence we've experienced.
Yeah. Yes. Every choice has an echo effect. There's cause and effect for everything that we do. And what I like to search and always question is, how do we make it easier for people to be able to make change? There's an approach. Discipline is a requirement. You must be disciplined. Purpose is a requirement. You must have purpose. In our society, in the Western society, discipline is lauded. You know, waking up at this time, this routine, everybody is just focusing on that. Purpose, it's talked about, but it's not talked about in as real in a tangible way as discipline. And what I say is you have to think of purpose as the engine to your car and discipline as the steering wheel, right? The steering wheel is important, but the engine is required to get the car moving because it's very difficult to turn a steering wheel on a car that's not moving. So what we have to do is we have to find out what you're trying to create, what you're trying to do. Then the discipline actually becomes easier. And then the tools that I provide, that's kind of helping with the steering. That's power steering all of a sudden. I'm just coming in to provide the engine, a little bit of fuel, and to provide power steering. The rest is up to you. But the thing is that the more value you have in what you're doing, the easier it is to use your discipline. And so what I tell people is to spend more time finding out that purpose, finding out what they value, being able to define what it is and what it isn't. Then it'll become easier to discipline yourself. If I'm thinking, for example, if I'm thinking that, okay, I want to make such and such money. If I'm not motivated by money, if that's not my value, and I'm saying, okay, I want to be a multimillionaire by this time. If that doesn't move me as a coach, I wouldn't talk to a client and say money. I say, what are your values? Family. Do you want to be able to put on the best and most beautiful wedding for your daughter? That changes the game. The story's a little bit different. I can do the same thing for health. Do you want to be there to walk your daughter down the aisle? Do you want to be healthy enough? When I tap in on what you naturally value, you are more inclined to act and display discipline because your purpose is tied to what you already care about. This is why it's so important to know what your carrots and sticks are so that you can get to where you want without having to work so hard.
Right. No, that's great points, Burke. And so let me just sort of recap what we've talked about thus far, sort of the recipes to build a solid foundation in life. We talked about embracing the emptiness, embracing a passive approach versus an active approach, embracing humility and flexibility, right? Surrounding ourselves with egos, identifying, committing to a great purpose. I think the last one I came across was having the courage to stand alone. And what I mean by that is when we think about originals and we think about Rembrandt and we think about Mona Lisa or Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods, what made them iconic was when you looked at them, they were unique. They were original. There was nobody else on the planet like them. They defined styles. They defined how people wore their basketball trunks or their golf shirts or whatever accessories they had on it. It's an original. And we think about our ability to stand alone in this culture. We know that marketing is driven off carbon copies, right? You set a standard, you have influencers, and what those people are trying to do is help sell an item, a given item, or a concept, or maybe piercings or tattoos, whatever it may be, right? But when we think about where value really resides, it's being in the original. We can all go get tattoos, and all we are is a carbon copy. We know that originals are worth more than carbon copies. Right. So I think it's the ability in this society to stand alone for what you believe in, for Absolutely. Who you are. And when people don't see it your way, and even though they may provide emotional supports that seem attractive, you have to have the ability and the strength to say, no, I'm standing alone because I want to be an original in this society. Because again, we know originals have much more value than carbon copies.
You know, it's such an interesting thing. I'm the anti, right? If I see something that looks like anything else that I've seen, I've lost interest. Even if I see something I don't like, I'm more intrigued in that than seeing a repetition or regurgitation of something that I like, that I've seen. The reason is because there's only one us. In my vision statement, I always say our unique greatness. When I work with my clients, I never use the same exact approach because they are unique. Someone finds creativity they just love taking pictures. It has nothing to do with the industry that they're in, but I know that that's important to them. And so I move in that direction. Somebody else who's more mathematically focused. Okay, then I move in that direction. The uniqueness, the fingerprints that we all have is what's powerful. Authenticity is not about trying to be authentic. Authenticity is about letting go of what other people are defining for you. It's you showing up as you are. And if you don't know who you are, then you have to do work. You have to follow that value system and say, what is it that I like? What would I want to do in this situation? What do I wish I could have said in this situation? If you start to put all that information together, you'll start to notice that you would be actually saying things that some people would like and some people would not like. Most of the time, fear is what controls our actions. Fear of being socially kind of ostracized, of not being accepted. And so what we do is we put ourselves into jars so that we can be accepted. So in other words, we lie, put a mask on, and teach others to fall in love with the mask. So they fall in love so much with the mask that we're terrified to take it off. We're terrified to take it off. What authenticity is taking it off and letting people love and hate you, because their thoughts are irrelevant to who you are. And how in the world would I give you power over my happiness? And then when I get to that space where I'm all of a sudden being who I am, then happily I make friends and some enemies. And I think that that's really where the test is. The test is you being so willing to commit to who you are, that you're willing to be loved and hated. Sadly, most people live their lives trying to be liked. And liked is a gray zone. Liked is death. It's a slow death. The goal is to be loved and hated. And when you have that adulation and you have those people that don't like you, both are irrelevant because you are you. That's freedom. That's why authenticity is so important.
No, those are great points. And who says what they think matters or is even true, right? So I think the idea of not being swayed by the opinions of the majority, this is really important in this time. We think about COVID, and we know there's a divide, whether it be the right wing or the left wing, and people are going off data points of, certainly things that meet up with their view of the world, their worldview, right?
Right.
And it's really important right now to have critical thinking skills. And I would argue that in our educational system,
yes,
intentionally critical thinking skills of people have been really suppressed within the educational system. It's not really highlighted. They don't want smart thinking people in America. I'm convinced the government doesn't, because it's easier to lead people around that don't really think critically. But I would argue that, to your point, you got to really have an attitude that you really don't care what people think. That to me is the ultimate definition of success, when you can really, whether it be your family, no matter who, you don't care what they think. Now, by the way, if you're in a self-destructive sort of way, I think it's good for people to come in your life and to speak in your life and help you out. But if you're a otherwise functioning adult, you're responsible, you're paying taxes, you're raising kids, you're doing all the right things, I think it's really important not to really care too much about people think, but it's also important to have an idea of what you believe and why you think the way you do. And again, we've talked at length about the monkey brain that controls the cerebral cortex. With a higher level thinking, it's really important to, on the issues, go deeper. And if you want to stand alone, you have to have a mastery and a command of the issues, to know for certain as to why you believe what you believe, and being able to substantiate what you believe. It doesn't mean you don't have the ability to show flexibility with other ideas coming inbound and adding them maybe to your construct. But if you want to have the ability to stand alone, that courage, it really starts with self-knowledge and knowledge of the issues around you, so that we're not just swayed by public opinion. That doesn't mean we want to be difficult. It just means we want to be right based on the data, based on the statistics. And in this argument between COVID-19 and is it a political issue or is it a real issue, it's really just immersing yourself in the facts and going with the flow of what you're being presented, as opposed to taking stark contrasting views, maybe just to get attention or to be difficult.
It's so, whenever I'm having a conversation or debating with someone, I always say this statement. I say, it's not about who's right, it's about what's right. And as soon as we can get to that space where what's right is more important than who's right, then we don't have stake in the game, right? And that's where you're in a space where you kind of do stand alone, because you're like, I'll stand on the side of truth. I don't care whose mouth it comes out of, right? Because I'm not equating that if I'm right, then my entire posse is right. I'm not going to that herd mentality. And that's really kind of where we become. We use data to more than to get to truth, is to prove the point of the herd, right? And so the problem is, if my intention is using truth to gain an identity, then it's a lie. But if I use truth to gain truth, then I win. I win. And so it puts me in a space where I'm not claiming an identity. I'm not claiming who I am. I'm not authentically saying, look, I'm authentic. If I'm attempting to say that, I've lost authenticity, because if I need you to look, then I am concerned about your belief, right? And if you disagree with me, I'm concerned about your disbelief, right? If I have a concern of what you think, whether it's true or not, whether it's my imagination or not, I have lost my authenticity to an extent. Now, obviously, we want to be around the eagles who can call us and be like, hey, you know what? You did that's too much. Take it back, calm it down. That's great. Just like you said, if you're functioning, But the question to understand if you're authentic is to say, who am I doing this for? What do I gain by saying this? If I gain a further kind of embolstering of my identity connected to something versus just trying to get closer to understanding, then you start to realize that it's not truly authentic. Not saying that authenticity is black or white. There's a spectrum. My goal is to get to the top of that spectrum, is to be so fully myself where I could disagree with somebody who usually agrees with me, right? And humbly be willing to listen, but stick to my guns. It's that ability to dance where we are a lone wolf. I would never say that I'm Republican or Democrat or never. There's no title. I don't. These are names. These are titles. I can tell you what I believe and what I don't believe. I can tell you the dance. I can tell you my opinion. And people will get frustrated by that because they're saying choose a side, and not just politically, in religion, in ethnicity, in financial, socio-demographic, like socioeconomic, all of this stuff. Everybody's trying to get where they are in the case system. But the truth is, I'm not using your measurements. They're all man-made. I'm not using those measurements. Well, some of them are real and they really have real world effects. I'm not living by your measurements. My measurement is me and God. Anything else outside of that, we're playing a game. We're trying to win something. And anything outside of that is a loss of authenticity, a loss of flow, a loss of satisfaction. And I mean that fulfilled satisfaction, that joyous one, not the one of wins, but the one who just loves playing the game.
Yeah, no, but well said, Berkey. Well said. You know, I also reflect on great people don't follow the crowd, right? And what does it mean to be great? It really means taking maybe an unpopular opinion or position, or doing something that runs counter. And I sort of reflect on what you were saying, that if there's a agenda driven by why you're doing what you're doing, right? I'm taking a stake, or taking a position on an issue. The question then becomes, what's the agenda, right? And if it's pure and it's, you know, undefiled in a sense, and it's really to increase understanding and awareness, that's one thing. But if it's tribalism, that's another thing. And I was reflecting on a headline where it says, Paul Parson tribalism runs deep, right? So we know that this since we're in election year, this whole thing is going to run down party lines, right? He didn't act soon enough, reacted soon enough. And no matter what, it's all politics. And we know that people can easily get ginned up over the time of day. And this is why I think critical thinking and making sure that the sources we're pulling from are rational and real. In fact, I had a great exchange today with one of my friends on Facebook, and I asked a simple question about, you know, is it political? Is it virus? Help me understand. Here's some numbers from CDC. And while we could all agree that we're all not sure what's going on in the months to come, we're going to learn a lot more, because retrospectively, people are going to look back and say, you know, they did this, they didn't do this, and here's some data and statistics and facts. And sure, we're going to be a lot more clear. It's sort of like a pilot flying a plane. They're very clear in the clouds because they got an instrument panel that tells them if they're right side up, right side down, what the airspeed is, or vertical, you know, ascent rate is, or descent rate is. We have a lot of information. Right now, we don't. But then he brought in some color to the conversation, saying, look, I knew 3 people directly that have died from coronavirus. I had a neighbor, they got pulled out of her house at 12 midnight screaming because she thought she was going to die. She has coronavirus. So it's not to minimize the suffering and pain. And the idea that he was able to color a conversation, what did that do? It helped me see it from that perspective, which is important. That doesn't mean the idea that politicians are going to mess up the numbers for their gain isn't real, because it is, in my opinion, because by definition, their job is to stay in power and maintain power. Absolutely. My goal as a citizen is try to understand what is truth, which way's up, and how they use fear and manipulation to manipulate and create fear. Because we want to be safe, we want to do the right thing, but at the same time, I worry about my friends' jobs and their businesses. I really, really do. And then so that's also top of mind as I think about this problem. But I think it's really important ultimately to say, have the courage to stand alone. What is it you believe in? Why do you believe that way? But also have the humility to say, hey, I can be flexible as I get new data in. I can listen to that, assimilate it, and understand it in context. But I think underlying all that has to be critical thinking, ability to look critically at the issues and look at all sides, and then make a reasoned determination.
Yeah, that's powerful. And just imagine a society of people like that. Just imagine and it doesn't even have to be the entire society. Imagine a 5%, 10%, 15%. If that type of thinking becomes normalized, where it's not about, this like topple the government thing. It's just, all we're saying is just becoming more awake. First off, stress levels decrease, happiness increases. We start to realize that circumstances aren't determinate, and people agreeing with us isn't determinant of happiness. All of a sudden, it's, as for me and my family, this is what we believe and this is what we'll do, right? And I'm not going to tread on your soil and you're not going to tread on mine, and have this understanding where we're in a powerful place. Now, obviously, there's times for revolutions. There's time for all these things, of course. How did our country even come? But it's really coming from a very critical space where we're not putting ourselves into this place where we're ruminating over the wrongness of things, right? And then ruminating and finding other people and starting to coagulate with those, because what we're doing is we're taking in our own poison. If we're authentic and true to who we are, then we buffet this world. We buffet the world. We say, this food I like, okay, this food I don't like, but I know it's good for me. And we go through the world and we live a life that's authentic to what our body needs, what our needs are, what our family needs. And then we move from that space, never getting too caught up with anything, never taking things too seriously, everything in moderation.
Right. And I think in this day and age, we don't know what the next 10 years is going to hold. We don't know how this virus will iterate and mutate and change. I could read a couple things on articles I was reading today in my business. I'm in the stroke business. And there's a very scary phenomenon. Experts offer guidance to counter nearly 40% drop in stroke imaging during pandemic. Now think about that. There are people having strokes that can't get to the hospital and they're not being imaged. And that, when you have a stroke and you have a blockage, you either get massive deficits or you die, right? And then there's another one where there's a new coronavirus threat to children, and they're seeing swelling in the brain, swelling in the vasculature, all these anomalies. And I read another one the other week where with 30 and 20, late 20s and 30-year-olds, they're getting strokes where you remove a blood clot from a major vessel in the brain, and all of a sudden, real time, a stroke or a clot starts to reform and form, right? Wow. So, I think that's just examples of, there's so much uncertainty moving forward that it's going to be a much better position as us as Americans working together with an understanding mind, because the idea of we want, Joe or Trump in the White House is missing the point. Now, one could argue one has different leadership qualities, totally. But I'd argue if we're in a republic and people want to get voted for, they're going to work really hard to make sure they're doing the right things from the American people's perspective, regardless of party. So then it comes down to, in my mind, that we have to get a mindset and a construct of how do we work through these times? Because I'm telling you, in the next 10 years, if we were to be able to look into the future and have a conversation right now, it'd be an interesting conversation, right? And the idea that we're trying to be tribal and not work together, and to your point, it just increases anxiety, cortisol levels, stress, heart attacks, strokes. Right. Not a good combination. And I think there's an opportunity to get, somewhat reflective and sort of drive a sort of a wise perspective and a reasoned perspective in these times to help us all get through this time. Because, if there was somebody on the side of the road that had a DNR, I could care less. Democrat, Republican, that is, not DNR, do not resuscitate. I wouldn't care. I'd help them. They're a human being, period. Right. And so I think that's what we got to get to in America, where we love people as we love ourselves. Yeah. We try to help people. We walk in wisdom. And we really have to be mindful of what these politicians are doing. And I think media, politicians, CIA, there's all an agenda out there. And if we're just putting our head in the sands thinking, blah, 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 life's perfect. Right. And all these elements and these institutions are there for our benefit. Right. That's where I think we as Americans have to look at it and say, well, what are they doing for our benefit? And how are they helping the problem? Because the power resides with the American people to do great things, to come together. And I think by and large, America's done that, right? Yeah. With, the fact that they've self-quarantined, you see story after story. But I think that sustained approach is really going to be required as we move forward out of this thing.
You hit the nail right on the head, where it's us. Like, remember we talked about this last week. Nobody's coming to save us. It's us, right? Yep. There is no politician. And the thing is really kind of, for me, one of the things that I want to do is I want to have politicians and famous people and all the things that we laud. I want them to be brought back to earth in terms of, wait, we're the story. If I look at movies and I look at actors, all they're trying to do is live out narratives of our lives. We're the stars that they're trying to emulate, right? We're the ones. And the same thing with politicians. They're trying to get our votes. But for some reason, we're looking up to them as though they're going to give something. No, we've placed them there so that they can do something for us. right? And so we have to understand that the first politician is in our mind. Who are you going to vote for? Your frontal cortex or your limbic? What your limbic system? What are you voting for? Because if you vote for this, then this will vote for that. If you vote for this, then this will vote for that. Is it going to be backwards or is it going to be forwards? And so if we can get people to be in a place where they're thinking critically, just like you said, then all of a sudden the level of politicians that show up, the level of mindsets that show up, the level of courses that are taught in school, because we can move the needle. And so we start from that mindset. Who am I voting for? If I vote
what's
for
funny
T,
about that, you just made me realize something. That's exactly right. You think about, they always say corporate America's in charge and they're setting the agenda. And maybe there's true. There's a lot of maybe kickbacks is too strong, but there's a lot of paying off of politicians. But when you think about a business and what makes it successful, it's the American consumers vote to shop there. Amazon, people
100%.
have voted to shop there. That's why Jeff Bezos is the richest man on the planet. If they vote not to shop there, you can destroy every American business in a heartbeat. So the power is within the American people's hands to change and etch the business landscape of America, and certainly the policies they go with. And I would argue the same thing's true of politics, that we have that ability to really shape the narrative, but it's incumbent that we're educated, we're aware, and we're not voting with the limbic rich system, but with the cerebral cortex. We know the issues. We hold these politicians to a high standard. Why not?
Right.
I mean, and I wouldn't say they're the best and the brightest in there that America offers by any shot, by any stretch from what I've seen. But why not hold them to a super high standard? It's not like your life isn't held to a high standard. It's not like the utility bill company says, hey, don't worry about it.
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Or the car company says, don't worry about your payment. Or the mortgage company says, hey, don't worry about it. We got it. No, you're held to a high standard. So should they be. And by the way, I think there should be term limits. I really, really do. I think, you just get the same thing. It's like what is stupidity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and again and expecting different results, right? That's the definition of stupidity. And so I think there's things we can do as Americans. We can demand certain things, but at the end of it all, underpinning it all, I think we got to come together and recognize we're human beings that typically want the same things. And there's some bad apples out there. We know that,
right.
They typically want the same things. And I think we have to hold our politicians to task.
And it goes back to that values thing, finding out where the lowest common denominators are. I've worked on every side. I've worked with district attorneys. I've worked with police officers. I've worked with formerly incarcerated people. I've worked on all the sides. I see humans. Humans are humans. They have the same needs, right? It's the different structures and circumstances. And obviously, at the same time, there's also different chemicals that allow a person to show up or display certain characteristics, right? If I picked somebody up and flipped them in a different situation, they would show up very similar to what's being seen on any side. The problem is we think that we chose to be on our side. We have no idea what type of underpinnings and what type of under platforms have placed us to be where we're at, right? How lucky or unlucky we are. We have to just accept that. But if we understand at the bottom of it, as I've worked with everybody, we have very similar values, just like you said. Are there a couple bad apples? 100%. But we are majoritively desiring family, love, connection, purpose, meaning these certain things. And if we can say, okay, yeah, I totally, absolutely, 100% unequivocally disagree with this part, but that doesn't mean I disagree with you as a human being. That's where power is. Because then if we start there, then we can start to build. And when I say build, it's not building some crazy movement. It's just building a little bit of contentment in self. And once we are content, then we desire self-actualization. Once we desire that, then we desire serving. Once we desire serving, then we start thinking about how do we help the next generations. Then we make our choices based on those values, and then we start to change the world.
It's funny. I was going back to what you were saying about The Mask. I remember the Jim Carrey movie, The Mask, and how we put on these facades. And it reminds me, I see a guy in a truck, a big macho, it's jacked up. And it's like, where would you go off-roading here? And, he comes out and he projects something. And I remember coming across this guy one time and he got out of his truck. We're at Home Depot and we had our paths crossed and I asked him a question on something. It turned out to be a really nice guy, but the thing he was trying to project is don't screw with me. Don't mess with me. I'll run you over. You look badass, man. Right. So this thing that people are trying to project about who they are and their position in life. And it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about, the idea of humility and flexibility. I think the biggest opportunity we have as Americans is to stay humble, because you'll recognize that people you make a split-second judgment on the roadway, for example, Maybe they did something, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they're not driving fast enough. That if you encounter that person in a social situation and you talk to that person, we've done this many times, you walk away saying, hey, that person's really nice. But in the moment where the monkey brain's taken over,
Totally.
and it's the fight or flight or the instant emotion, how we color that person really affects, right?
Yeah.
Really affects perhaps our whole entire day. Someone cuts you off, you may be thinking about that for 6 hours.
Oh my gosh.
So the opportunity, the idea of recognizing that people put on facades, they put on projections, whether it be the businessman that's worth millions who thinks he's now God or just short of God in the pecking order. It's interesting. And if we could recognize that people are really saying they have a thing on their forehead that says, love me, accept me, right? I'm good enough.
Right.
And I'm going to continue to strive because I'm good enough. That's all people are doing, right? And so I think a lot of times people's projections of how they want to be seen get in the way of their own humanity. And if we can just look beyond all the bullshit that people project and recognize they're humans, and probably behind all the facade, there's probably something nice under there, and there's something that built up that facade. Again, that goes back to critical thinking, higher level thinking, where you just can get people in context and recognize that people trigger to certain things and they show up way to certain things. But at the end of the day, underlying it all, they're probably not too bad.
Well, it's funny, man. When you're talking about triggering, our mind, we have to understand we're fighting an uphill battle. Our mind finds reasons for ourselves and gives no reasons for people that harm. So case in point, like if, for example, if I'm getting cut off, if I cut somebody off, I'm like, hey, I'm running late. That's why it's happening. So I don't feel guilty. But if somebody cuts me off, it's like they're doing that directly towards me. We automatically assume the worst in people and give excuses for ourselves. That's our brain. So we have to fight against that. That's why the prefrontal cortex is so important, is to be able to say, wait, before I trigger, before I get to this place where I'm too focused on this, how can I see it in a different way? When you allow yourself to pause, this is where magic happens. And that's why my work is like so important, because I'm spending the first 3 months practically teaching you how to pause and see it. Because when you pause, then you can change. If you don't pause, you cannot change. You will be a reaction your whole life. It's a space called mindfulness that we create. And it's something we can talk about this next week, because it's really powerful concept on how to pause. But if you pause, then you realize that, okay, my trigger mind is the monkey brain. My trigger mind doesn't think. So now that I know that, I need to notice my triggers. Then when you notice your triggers, you can make changes. And ultimately, it puts you in a space where you are more humble. You are more willing to see the different side of the coin, see from another person's perspective, because you're not threatened by them. People only react because they're threatened. And if we can reduce the threatening, that sense of threatening, it's the amygdala in our brain. This is the fear and threat, fight or flight. If we can turn that down a little bit, then we have the space and time to see other people's perspective. And when we see theirs, it turns theirs down a little bit. And then they have the space and time to see ours.
So true. I like that, because it's sort of like, can you imagine NASCAR or Formula One without a pit stop?
Right.
You got to pause. You got to refuel. You got to get the tires on.
Those wheels will fall right off.
Slow her down and just get in the moment for about a couple seconds before you take back off. So I think that pause is important. Hey, Berkey, I really enjoyed today's discussion. Just another masterclass, and your wisdom and insights are really appreciated.
Back at you, man. Glad to get this time. Looking forward to the next one.
And be sure to hit like and subscribe to Beyond to put these videos higher on the algorithm for YouTube and Facebook. And until next time, thanks for tuning in.